R&D Ray O'Farrell, Senior Vice President at VMware, and what have you been discussing at the Web Summit today?
So far we've been talking about where cloud is actually going, a lot of focus on what is the future of cloud, and quite a bit of discussion also on the private, hybrid and public clouds and what are the differences between them and so on. On the show floor I've been spending a lot of time just talking to some of the startups down there. A lot of startups here, very exciting to see them.
Are there any that stand out in your mind?
There's one or two. I'd prefer not to get into some of the details, so I want to actually go and talk to some details with some of them, but there's a few which are directly related to virtualization, and obviously that's of interest to us and of interest to find some partners in that space as well.
At the summit this year, cloud, virtualization, big data, all of these trends seem to be taking a very clear focus, and they've kind of dominated the trends today. What do you think are the key moving sectors in that area?
So to some degree the key moving is what you've pointed out, the fact that these things are sort of coming together as a kind of a cohesive whole or a holistic view of how all that fits together. From a VMware point of view, our focus, and in particular the area that I focus on, is around this bringing these technologies together into a software-defined data center. And how will that be managed, and how will applications work in that environment? And that ranges from a private cloud to a public cloud to traditional applications, client-server type of applications, and also those which are more big data and built for the cloud to some degree. So I think to me one of the more exciting things to see here is the fact that all that stuff is starting to come together and be discussed as a whole, not as individual separate items.
And for the general person that's here today, their greatest interaction with cloud is probably how it's impacting how they work.
Yes,
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different aspects to that. From a typical consumer, using something on their cell phone, whether they're using it to, get a taxi or something like that, in many ways they don't realize they're using cloud for that. To them it's all about the application. I want a taxi, it arrived on time, or I want to buy something and it was shipped to me on time. And I think that's the ideal way for them to consume the cloud. They shouldn't know, is it a VMware product, is it Amazon, is it whatever it is. It's just, I've got an application, I've got a relationship with a particular vendor, and it's that relationship is working very well from the cloud. So from a consumer point of view, I think, cloud is something that should not be on their mind. It's about the stuff that they buy and so on. I think from the type of customers that I deal with, which are IT professionals, I think the world is changing for them because their customers, their lines of business are putting them under a lot of pressure to say, give me the flexibility or give me that same experience I have on my cell phone when I purchase something and I get it delivered to me, or when I order a taxi and it just arrives. I want to do the same when it comes to my IT resources. I want that same sense of IT as a service, or the dynamic and very responsive sort of effect that I get when I use the cloud. And I think to those people it's becoming more of a self-service model and a more dynamic model in general. So I see these two very different things. One group has to worry about what exactly is the cloud itself, and that's the IT professionals. But the end consumers using their iPhone or whatever to buy something don't need to worry. And ideally, the lines of business in a company doesn't need to worry. They should say, I want this application to run, I need this service to be given to me, and their IT organization takes care of that for them.
So you have assurances there for people not to worry, but there does seem to be hesitation in adopting BYOD strategies and taking on the cloud. How can you counteract that? Do you talk to IT managers? Do you talk to CEOs?
So I think in terms of the bring your own device strategy, while that's that acronym is short, it covers a very broad spectrum of things, right? I think in one aspect of it, if I look at it from remote desktops, or how do I rather than having a computer on my desk where I log into and I do my work every day, instead I bring a laptop or I bring an iPad or something like that, and from there I actually access the desktop, but the actual computer is running somewhere back either in the private cloud or somewhere else in the data center. I think from that point of view, I don't think there's much fear on that at this stage. In fact, that's a pretty widely used model. We have everything from universities to high schools. Lots of companies are starting to use that whole concept of a remote desktop. Companies, for instance, when you go and rent a car, typically what that vendor is doing, that person behind the desk, is they're running one of those remote desktops for you. They didn't necessarily bring their own device in that case, but the concept is the same. I think on the other side of it, when you get into things like mobile devices and iPads and everything else, As an individual, somebody privately using these, I don't think there's any factor there. The interesting part is when those devices come into an enterprise, because an enterprise is used to managing their access to data and understanding, what's connected into their network and so on. Now those IT organizations have to deal with this plethora of new and wonderful devices, not quite sure who's logging in and all of that. And I think that's where us as IT vendors can really help with the IT organization to manage and deal with those. Products which help in the provisioning and the deprovisioning of those devices, products which are there in terms of how to help the user separate their work profile from their personal profile, because the device is probably their personal device. So I think not something to be afraid of as such, but I think something where that needs to be just managed. The organization needs to be very clear with their workers and so on, that in this model, when you bring your own devices, there may well be some things that the IT organization has to manage.
And when you think of the next generation of workers coming up, they're going to be used to having devices around them all the time that they can use themselves. So is this something, that has to be addressed? It can't be ignored by companies.
I think it has to be addressed, and you said and can't be ignored. I actually don't think it's being ignored. I think that most companies right now are getting on board with this bring your own device model, and not just because the employees that are coming in are demanding that, but it actually makes sense for the company as well, because it feeds back into things like employee satisfaction. An employee doesn't necessarily want to be told you must use this exact cookie cutter story. Instead, if you want an Apple, we'll work with that. If you want to work with an Android device, we'll work with that. So I think the employees coming in who are used to this, they have that demand, and I think the IT organizations are working with it, and I don't see that's a big problem for them. I think they're actually quite anxious to work with those new employees and to work in this model.
And also, if you've implemented these solutions, it does, while it brings obstacles like security and things like that to the fore, it also brings a lot of opportunities in that you're less limited with devices.
Yes.
So you can turn up in an office, you bring your own device, you're not limited to the hardware that's there. Is this the future that you envisage for enterprise?
Yes, I think so. I think we do need to be a little bit careful when you say, it might bring some challenges with security and so on. A CIO or the guy who runs the IT in an organization, they have responsibilities that go beyond just provisioning the devices and just provisioning compute. They're responsible for protecting the enterprise as well, making sure data doesn't end up in places it shouldn't end up and so on. So I think that while there's a lot of opportunity by bringing those devices, cooler devices, newer devices, the very latest stuff, you are still going to require some level of management to come from the IT organization or the corporation, just to make sure that something is not going on which could actually damage the enterprise in some way. But I think that can be done in a way which is relatively lightweight, particularly if we as those vendors providing that management software into the IT can, we do our jobs right and make sure that there is very little negative impact on the worker who's bringing their own device into the mix. And I think that will be fully achieved. I don't see any concerns with that at all.